Morning, everyone. Thanks so much. And I woke up this morning and the torrential rain was just horrific. And I thought, oh no, that's going to really affect our numbers. But you've made it. So thank you so much. Bit of a break in the clouds to come and join us today. I'm Sarah Lethbridge. I'm the Pro Dean of External Engagement here at Cardiff Business School. And I've been just told to move slightly more strategically in the middle. So sorry, everybody. I'll just stand over here. So thanks for coming to our breakfast briefing this morning. Lots of you are familiar faces. You'll know that we regularly hold these events to make sure that the outside world gets to hear about all the wonderful work of Cardiff Business School and the work of our partners. So today we're celebrating 20 years of the living wage. So really delighted to have our esteemed colleagues with us today to talk about this really fantastic initiative and importantly, how Cardiff Business School's been a really key part of that. Speech to text captioning is available for this event. Hopefully there's wizards in the background posting links in the chat, and I think you can just press the captioning button as well in Zoom. Upcoming events. Akmal Hanouk, great lecturer in the business school. He is also working in a very important way to promote ethnic minority entrepreneurship. So we've got a conference on the Thursday, 16th of November, looking at how do we foster inclusivity and diversity within business support. Our next breakfast briefing is going to be Productivity in Wales with a rather provocative title of Searching for a Miracle. So Professor Andy Henley has been working extensively in this space with the Productivity Institute. And unfortunately, UK is not doing fantastic, but Wales is really doing quite more problematically. So we're going to be exploring that in more detail on the 1st of December. And you're back again, Debs. Talking on the 24th of January about another project that you're getting involved with, refugee employment. So please join us for those. I know we've talked about it before at other sessions, but our Help to Grow programme, such an amazing opportunity for small and medium-sized enterprises. It's 95% funded. You get education, you get coaching, mentoring, peer group sessions. Honestly, it's such a fantastically funded, really highly thought of programme. Contact Linda if you want to find out more. And I don't know who's watched our podcast. Anybody? Yes, someone over there. Thanks so much. We've done 6 episodes. You're in one of them as well, aren't you? So, really talking about some of this work, actually. But tune in, Spotify, YouTube. It's very exciting for the school, and we want to do more of them. So we need to get those watching and listening figures up to get another round in. This event's being recorded. There'll be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the session. And if you're online, how many people have joined us? 27 so far. Then please pop your questions in the chat. And now I love it when I can hand over to our chair, Professor Ed Heery, to take forward the rest of the event. Thank you, Ed.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out to attend our session this morning. I'm just going to give a very super quick introduction to our great speakers today. We've only got an hour. I want to leave plenty of time for questions at the end, so I won't take up much of your time. I'll introduce them in reverse order. Just arrived, fashionably late. Councillor Huw Thomas, leader of Cardiff City Council. Huw's been a great supporter of the living wage here in Wales. And he's going to talk about the actions that the council has taken to promote the living wage standard, including leading the Cardiff Living Wage City project, which I think has been very successful. In the middle of the sandwich, got my 2 colleagues and co-authors, Deborah Hann and David Nash, and they're going to talk about the report that we're launching this morning. I think you've all got copies on your chairs. And this reports the findings from a survey we carried out in 2021 of accredited living wage employers, more than 1,500 provided responses. And it looks at why employers sign up to progressive labour standard of this kind, what impact it has on their organisations and so on. To begin, delighted to say we've got our brand new Vice-Chancellor, Professor Wendy Larner. Wendy is going to say welcome to everyone here, but also say something about why it's important for Cardiff University to pay the living wage and support the living wage campaign. Over to you, Wendy.
Well, Croeso and Borida, and it's lovely to meet you all. Thank you so much to the Business School for inviting me to this breakfast briefing. And I've already made a mental note about the next one that I'm going to come to. Clearly a wonderful event. It's been Living Wage Week, and this is such an enormous success for us. I mean, you know as well as I do that there's never been a more important time to promote, support and accredit the real living wage, that the cost of living crisis is impacting on our communities, our city in extraordinary ways, and the rising prices of food and energy are pushing many households to the limit. The living wage is what's making the difference. The living wage is what's helping families keep their head above water. It's delighted, you can tell I'm a newcomer to Wales, New Zealand, not Australia, just in case. But it's delightful for me to see that in Wales, despite all the challenges that we're facing, more employers, not fewer employers, have been accrediting to pay the living wage in Wales, a 40% increase in employees covered by the living wage in the past year alone. What an extraordinary success for our country and our communities. I'm personally really delighted to be here. I'm deeply committed to the living wage, and I come to this event with a real sense of pride for three reasons. One, so proud that this university was the first university in Wales and one of the first in the UK to accredit to paying the living wage. I never won that argument in my previous university, so it's fantastic to be here in a university that really stood up when that counted. A first mover, a network of people, colleagues, trade unions, NGOs, all contributed to that. But I do know that we owe a special debt to Jane Sadgrove, our former COO and HR director, who was very determined that we introduce the living wage here. We then supported other universities in Wales to accredit, and all the universities in Wales are now signed up. And across the road, I now appreciate in new ways the importance of lobbying for that bridge across the railway. But across the road, the Spark building is the first living wage building in Wales. So all the employees and tenants in that building have committed to paying the real living wage. So again, we're setting precedents for others to follow. Secondly, I'm so proud that world-leading research on the living wage is being conducted here at Cardiff University by the team we're going to hear from today. I know, because I knew this from New Zealand, that they are known worldwide as the leading authorities on the living wage. Their articles and recent books attest to that in spades. But even more importantly, this research doesn't sit on the shelf. It's not just a report that's gathering dust. This is work that informs the Living Wage Foundation. That team were at the highly influential Wonky conference this week. For those of you who don't know this is a higher education conference, enormously influential in our sector. And they're currently working with the Mayor of London to estimate the impact of the living wage on the UK's capital city. They were the basis of a REF impact case study. This is really important for us. This is where we demonstrate the links between our research and changes in the real world. And for me, there's nothing better than seeing the fabulous research from this university changing the lives of people, and in particular, in this case, changing the lives of working people here in Cardiff. And then thirdly and finally, I'm really proud that Cardiff University is playing its part as a major anchor institution within Cardiff by promoting the living wage and acting as a leading partner in Cardiff as part of the Living Wage City team. We know that education and employment conditions and opportunities are key to improving the quality of life in Cardiff and surrounding areas, and we're deeply committed to reducing the life expectancy gaps within our city. We remain absolutely committed to providing civic leadership within the team, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more from Councillor Thomas, lovely to see you again, Huw, on the success of the Cardiff Living Wage City project later on. So welcome, lovely to be here. I'm looking forward, like you, to learning an awful lot more this morning as we work through our speakers and to that real commitment to changing the lives of those living and working in our capital city, Cardiff. Diolch yn fawr.
Thanks very much, Wendy. I think Debs is going to start the presentation on the report.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wendy, and thank you to the Executive Education team for helping us run this briefing today. We are really proud to have been involved in the living wage movement for the last 20 years, and we're really, really happy to be sharing our research with the room and online this morning. To give everybody listening a bit of a background, for those who don't know anything about the living wage movement, it started 20 years ago. This is a celebration of 20 years of the movement, with the East London chapter of Citizens UK, the telco chapter as it was then. And in late 2000, November 2000, they ran a listening campaign of their religious organisations, their trade unions, of people in the community. And the message they heard very clearly was that there was a serious issue linked to low pay. And they discussed why that was an issue. And the answer was all of these people that they spoke to were in work, but the level of wages was not enough to actually allow them to live. They were surviving rather than thriving. And this was the start of the living wage movement. It came at a time of a similar movement in the US. For those of you who've seen movies like Bread and Roses, grown out of the janitor movement. And it started with grassroots actions taken by community members on organisations such as the HSBC, Homerton Hospital. We moved 10 years on, and the movement had been so successful that it became formalised. It became a piece of what we would call civil regulation, voluntary regulation. They created a standard that employers could sign up to and make public declarations about their willingness to pay a wage that allows their employees and their contractors, and I think it's important to note that it is for contractors as well, to survive. And to run that accreditation scheme, Citizens UK established a kind of co-sister organisation called the Living Wage Foundation. To be really clear, the living wage, or the real living wage as we call it quite often, is calculated by an independent body, and it reflects the amount that an individual would need to live, and to live to a standard that would allow them to do things like, possibly go on holiday every so often, or buy school shoes for their children, send their children on school trips. So this is more than a wage that allows you to just feed and cover your rent, but it is more than the minimum wage as well. This is not the minimum wage. This is not the national living wage, which is not a living wage. It's a 60% of an average wage. It started at £7.20 compared to a minimum wage of £6.08. And nowadays, the most recent announcement a few months ago was that the living wage for the UK would need to be £12 per hour, £13 something per hour in London. We move forward again 10 years in time, and we can see a movement that has been incredibly successful. It's a runaway train in some respects. We've got 14,000 employers in the UK who have now publicly declared that they are willing to pay and signed up to be living wage employers. Behind that 14,000 are significantly more who are either on their journey to accredit or who are paying the living wage because their competitors are. So this is a movement that has had significant impact. It also means something for the people in those organisations. We see over 350,000 beneficiaries in those accredited organisations. And again, beyond that, there will be further beneficiaries. Our data, and it is our data drawn from the Living Wage Foundation's data, estimates that around £3 billion has gone into the pockets of the lowest paid workers in the UK. That's a significant amount of money for those who are on very low wages. As Wendy noted, we have been involved in this movement in a variety of ways for a significant period of time. And I think I speak for the research team when I say we feel lucky to be involved in that. We've offered academic research-based support. We've provided figures that have been on the London Underground, but equally, we've been practically involved. We each sit on the Living Wage Cardiff City movement. We're involved in Living Wage Wales movements. We sit within the citizens chapters. This is not just an academic exercise for us. It is a practical exercise, and it speaks to the public value that sits within Cardiff Business School, that we use this as a way to engage with our communities in a new way. As part of the research over the last 10 years, we've conducted over 100 interviews with campaigners, employers, trade unions, government officials. We've undertaken and participated in a variety of meetings and actions. We've compiled our own database of all of those 14,000 employers, and we can tell you not just the data relating to living wage, but we can tell you broader pictures about what else they're doing, what their CSR statements say. What we're planning to talk about today, however, primarily will be our survey that we undertook, unfortunately, through the pandemic. It was completely coincidental to a degree, but actually it allowed us to ask questions about the idea of a living wage at a time of crisis. And we see in that, and I'm sure Dave will talk about this, we see that the living wage has survived the pandemic. It's surviving the cost of living crisis. We sent questionnaires out to around 7,000 organisations. That effectively was a census of all those that were accredited at a time. And we received responses from 1,500 of those employers. As Dave will talk about, there is a wide range of questions. Many of them we had included in a similar survey we ran 5 years earlier. So we can also talk about how changes have occurred over time. I'm going to hand over to Dave because he's got all the interesting and exciting things to say, to be honest with you. So there we go.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Debs, and thanks everyone for coming. So just to pick up on what Deb said, this strand of our research, which we've been doing for 9 years now, was really to try and understand the employer's experience of living wage accreditation, and really to answer 3.5 kind of core questions. And that is, why do they do it? Why do they sign up? How do they do it? And what are the impacts on them that stem from accreditation? And the extra question is kind of, are they going to keep on doing it? Okay, so in terms of the motives for accreditation, we asked this by listing a long list of about 20 possible reasons and asked respondents to say how significant they'd been. And the first thing is to say is that there are a broad range of motivations for accreditation, but these can be kind of summarized into 3 broad groups. And the first is what we call expressive motivations, in the sense that the employers said that they signed up largely to kind of articulate some core value or core mission of their organization. And in fact, the largest or the most significant single factor was the question that asked about acting in accordance with organizational values, with 90% of respondents saying that was of great significance. More general reputational factors were also clearly a driver, with 3/4 of employers saying that they wanted to be seen as a good employer, and more broadly that wanted to improve or enhance their corporate reputation. But really, it was the employment-based reputation that came out strongly. And throughout all the interviews that Deb's talked about and the open text questions in the questionnaire, the phrase "the right thing to do," it's the right thing to do, it's only fair that we pay our employees a decent wage, came up time and time again. So it's very much, kind of this kind of organization, or this values-led motivation. But alongside that, there was a more instrumental motivation. So it's not just, as one campaigner said to us way back in the start of the campaign, it's not just heartstrings that people sign up, it's also purse strings. So there was a clearly identified desire to improve aspects of HRM. And this is even before the current cost of living crisis. This fieldwork predates that. Where labour markets are tight, there was a desire to improve recruitment and retention, for example, with 50% of respondents saying that that was really important, a really important reason. About a quarter of respondents said that it was important to help them commercially win contracts or funding. And a key way that public bodies like councils, local authorities can and have spread the living wage is by looking favourably on employers or tenderers who kind of pay the living wage when they put work out to tender. And that was clearly seen and recognised by employers. And then the third identifiable range of factors is what we've called sort of the institutional factors. And these are really kind of institution stakeholders that might be external to the organisation, which have helped make that decision. Now, these findings come with a slight pinch of salt, because there may well be a degree of social desirability bias or ego involvement bias that respondents like taking credit for popular decisions and perhaps might conveniently forget that they were also asked to make that decision by somebody else. So a range of different factors were reported as important, but to a lesser extent. And that can range from encouragement from political leaders. Sorry, Huw. But also a direct approach from the Living Wage Foundation, a response to a public campaign by citizens maybe, or a request from a trade union, all of which were claimed to be less important, although our other research shows that all of these factors play a part. The big kind of outlier, or the big exception to this, is location-based campaigns. So things like living wage city movements, living wage places more generally, are seen by about half of respondents as being hugely significant. And I think Cardiff is a great example of a successful living wage city movement, and I'm sure Councillor Thomas is going to share the experience of that later on. So a broad range of motivations. In terms of our next question, how did employers implement the living wage? The findings here is that for the huge majority of organisations, it was kind of incorporated into existing pay structures. So 3/4 said that they had increased base pay up to the living wage, whereas only 6% said that they paid it as a supplement and left the pay structure unchanged. There was also evidence of further changes to pay structures, with about 40% saying that they had increased the pay of higher grades to maintain wage differentials, and about a quarter saying that they'd removed completely a number of pay grades at the bottom of the scale, which now fell below the living wage. It's also interesting to note that many employers go beyond the strict terms of their license agreement. So a majority of organisations pay casualised or agency staff who may be working on site for less than 8 weeks, which isn't covered by the living wage agreement. Or they may pay student interns or work experience students as well. In terms of broader HR changes, whether the introduction of the living wage had heralded a kind of broader changes in working practices, the overwhelming majority said that they'd absorbed, if you like, the cost of the living wage without making changes to those changes. So about 4 in 5 of employers said that. But of the minority who said that they had made changes, the majority of these were more what you would call positive, i.e. they would include things like extra training for living wage workers, more flexible working, more additional hours for those workers. And there was very little evidence of what's sometimes been called clawback, the notion that employers will kind of pay for the living wage by reducing benefits elsewhere. So we saw very small numbers saying that they had increased or intensified work, reduced overtime or hours, reduced the pay of other groups in the organisation, or even downsized. So kind of 1 or 2% at most claim to do that. So the evidence seems to be that living wage employers are not robbing Peter to pay Paul. This is a net benefit to the workforce as a whole. Living wage employers are clearly kind of committed to the standard and are proud to display it. So, again, vast majority of employers display the living wage logo both in their headquarters or in their premises and also online. 3/4 roughly display it on social media platforms and crucially in recruitment materials and in funding bids. So the living wage brand, if you like, is seen as valuable for a large number of employers. And the smaller minority go on to become more actively engaged in the campaign, and the university would be a prime example of this. But 1/4 of employers said that they had spoken and shared their experiences with potential accreditees. Should try and encourage them to sign up, to kind of bust some myths, if you like. And about 1 in 10 said that they provided speakers or materials for living wage events, such as in Living Wage Week, the Living Wage Champion Awards, etc. So there is a significant minority who become actively engaged in the campaign itself after accreditation. If we move on to the important question of what's the effect of living wage accreditation from the employer's point of view. And I think the important thing the overall factor is overwhelmingly positive. The number that you will probably see on the underground or on the Living Wage website is that 94% of employers who responded to our survey said that it had had at least some positive effect on their organization. But that's not to say that there weren't negative impacts as well. We asked a series of, I think, about 30 questions, both positive and negative, and asked employers to assess their significance. And some of if you like, the potential costs of the living wage were, 58% of employers said that it had increased their wage bill and that had been of some significance to their organization. Again, a slightly fewer number, but over half said that it had compressed wage differentials, and that created some kind of issues for them. But overall, the positive impacts the positive impacts outweighed the negative, both in terms of the number of and the range of those impacts and also the strength of them. So again, if we look at the specifics of those impacts, and they follow quite closely the kind of the range that we talked about in terms of the motivations. So the most often or the most significantly cited benefits are reputational. So nearly 9 out of 10 employers said that it had improved their employer reputation and also their more general corporate reputation. And 2/3 said that it had improved their ability to differentiate themselves from similar organizations in the same location or in the same sector. Moving on to the kind of more people management sort of side of the benefits, again, clear benefits are in the area of HRM and employment relations, with about 60%, over 60% claiming it had benefited both recruitment and retention of workers into those lower paying jobs. Organizational commitment, task motivation, similar numbers citing that there had been an improvement in these areas. And it's very heartening when we go to kind of speaking events, including the one on Monday over at Spark. We had an employer there from Tiny Rebel saying exactly the same thing, that it had helped recruitment, retention, motivation. So these are not just abstract kind of survey findings. They are repeated in the testimony that we hear from employers. Perhaps an unintended consequence of the living wage accreditation is that it improved relations between living wage low-paid workers and their managers or supervisors. So it improved internal employment relations. And then lastly, the third group of benefits that we can identify are those commercial benefits. So in fact, exactly half of the respondents to the survey said that it had helped attract customers and clients to their organization. And then slightly fewer said that it had helped secure contracts from all types of organizations, slightly higher response for the public sector bodies, but also it had helped get contracts from other private sector firms or third sector organizations. And about 1/3 finally said that paying the living wage overall had helped improve the quality of the service or product that their organization provides. So there are clear benefits that seem to be shown from the living wage. And that really sort of tells us that there is an identifiable business case for paying the living wage. and that these benefits are positive. They're broad-based across a range of different sort of spheres, but it is important to note that they are typically fairly mild. These are not, in most cases, transformative of business operation or of business performance, but certainly signing up to the living wage has a benign to positive effect on how organizations are run. What's also interesting, if you dig a bit deeper into the results, we can find that these benefits that we've just talked about are stronger in certain situations or amongst certain employers. Firstly, as Deb said, we did the same or a very similar survey 5 years earlier in 2016, and the reported benefits across all areas had gone up in 2021 compared to 2016. And this could be due to a range of factors. One could be that the brand value, if you like, of the living wage, the recognition that the benefit, the reputational benefits that it confers have grown, and therefore employers are seeing a greater benefit from attaching themselves to that standard. We also see that employers who've been accredited longer report higher benefits. And this really kind of, is reassuring. It speaks to the fact that the benefits of accreditation aren't just a single one-shot boost at the time of accreditation, that they can transform, so it doesn't transform, they can improve the operation of businesses in the long term as those changes become embedded. And part of that, I think, is spoken to by the next 2 points, which are interrelated. So amongst employers, that minority who have made broader HR changes, whether it be training, flexibility, changes in work organization, those organizations reported a higher benefit across a range of factors than those organizations who didn't make those changes. And those organizations are also more likely to be where there are greater proportions of employees who are accredited or who are actually uplifted. So where the bite of the living wage, where the costs or the impact on the organization is greater, organizations are more likely to make broader changes to accommodate that, but they're also more likely to report benefits stemming from that accreditation. Okay, just conscious of time. So if we move on to our last question, which kind of broadly is, are employers likely to stick with the campaign? What's their appetite for perhaps future and enhanced labour standards? So perhaps unsurprisingly, given the positive benefits we've just spoken about, 99% of the sample or survey respondents reported that they were likely or very likely to continue membership over the following 3 years. And I think it was about 85% said they were very likely. So very strong sort of forward-looking commitment to the campaign. At the time of the fieldwork in 2021, the Living Wage Foundation were in the process of, they had just launched the Living Hours Standard, which seeks to guarantee minimum hours and security of working hours for employees. And we're thinking about and we're designing a living pension scheme. These have subsequently both been launched. But at the time, the employers, the respondents said that they were, they had a very positive outlook about these potential future standards. So over half of respondents said that they would either definitely or probably sign up for living hours. And nearly 80% said that they would consider a voluntary pension standard for low-wage workers. So there seems to be a high degree of buy-in to the campaign and to potential further enhancements and extensions of this voluntary form of labour regulation. So to finish, what our research has found, not just this survey, but our broader research project on the living wage, is that the living wages has clearly become a significant feature in the UK labour market across the entire economy, across all types of employer, in all sectors and in all parts of the economy, including the strong performance here in Wales and indeed here in Cardiff. And the overwhelming experience for employers who sign up is a positive one in terms of how they implement it and the benefits and the effects of that accreditation. So the full report, for those of you in the room, you have one on your seat. Hopefully there are more by the door which you can collect. Please feel free to take away with you. It's also available online. You can scan the QR code, and there'll also be I think we'll post a link to the site to download that after the briefing's finished. And now I turn shamelessly into plugging mode, where the fact that the three of us have just recently published a book which heralds the entirety of our research, and is a very sort of detailed account of the living wage campaign. It's just recently been published by Oxford University Press. So as I've always wanted to say, there's a copy there. I'm just going to show. Proper shameless mode, is available in all good bookshops. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, David. There's a 30% discount on the book at the moment. You forgot to say that. Huw, over to you.
Well, firstly, Gaiwe, diolch yn fawr iawn am gwahoddiad I siarad heddi, a diolch am y cyflwyniad yna. Thank you very much for that presentation and for the invitation to speak here today. And thank you, Cardiff University, for so excellently hosting Cardiff's annual Living Wage Week celebrations. As chair of Cardiff's Living Wage Partnership, I welcome the opportunity to reflect on how far we've come over the last 4 years and set out where we want to get to by 2025 and perhaps beyond. The Cardiff Living Wage City Partnership was established back in 2018 to secure more jobs in the city that pay the real living wage, to encourage employers to become accredited living wage employers, and to gain living wage city status for Cardiff. Now, I've said many times, when I voted in the council chamber back in 2012, I'd not long become a councillor, for Cardiff Council to become a living wage employer. That remains, I think, one of the proudest votes I've ever cast. It saw the council's lowest paid workers get a pay rise of about £1,500 overnight. We became the first living wage paying council, real living wage paying council in Wales. We remain, I think, one of just 3 accredited living wage local authorities in Wales. So I'm very proud of that leadership that we've shown. When I became leader in 2017, and then Councillor Chris Weaver came into post as a cabinet member for finance with responsibility for this area, we were keen to go further and push out our experience and perhaps the leadership that the council was showing in this regard more broadly into the city. And that's where the Living Wage City Partnership came about. Our partnership now, which includes private, public and third sector organisations, we developed an ambitious 3-year action plan, which resulted in Cardiff becoming only the second UK city to be recognised as a living wage city in 2019. Now, before I update you on the further progress that continues to be made in Cardiff, I do just want to take a slightly longer moment to recognise Cardiff University's role as a key advocate and champion of the living wage movement here in Wales. In Cardiff, in Wales, and certainly across the UK as well. You have led by example, becoming the first accredited university in Wales, and in turn supporting other Welsh universities, both by example, but also in practical ways with their accreditation. And in what is a brilliant achievement, all Welsh universities are now accredited living wage employers. For some years now, the business school has also run a successful public value leadership academy, which was developed with Citizens Cymru, and that academy takes learning out of the classroom, so students have the opportunity to directly engage with local community issues. And this has included encouraging more local businesses to pay the staff the real living wage, making clear that a fair day's pay for a fair day's work not only benefits local employees and local community, but is also good for business, as we've heard from that evidence. And that research, I think, continues to be crucial. It is groundbreaking UK-wide research, but it also gives advocates, be they campaigners or politicians like myself, the tools, the weapons to go and speak to other employers, particularly in the private sector, and say, look, this is a good thing to do for a whole host of reasons. So to all of you involved in this from Cardiff University, you have my huge appreciation. Reading the report, I think a few findings were particularly impactful, and not to repeat what we've heard, but 85% of living wage employers said that living wage accreditation enhanced their reputation. 67% saying that it gave them a competitive advantage, and around 60% saying it helped with recruitment and retention. These are powerful figures, but we recognise that becoming an accredited living wage employer has got to be a business decision that each individual organisation makes in turn. And I think we recognise and are very alert to the challenging economic headwinds that we are all facing at the moment. I would remind everyone of the excellent support available from Cyngor Cymru here in Wales, and would encourage all organisations, I don't know if there are any in this room, but any organisation still considering accreditation or even struggling having accredited, to talk to Cyngor. In Cardiff, the council put in place a living wage accreditation support scheme, and that means that we pay small business accreditation fees for the first 3 years, which I think has helped get some employers over the line. And we've been able to continue funding that through the last 5-6 years. And if you visit the Living Wage Wales website, there's more information on there. Coming back to Cardiff University, they have been one of a number of key partners here in Cardiff, including Cyngor Cymru, including Citizens Cymru, who've worked collaboratively with us to drive the adoption of the Real Living Wage agenda and increase the number of accredited organisations in the city. In 2022, our Living Wage City Partnership set a target of having 300 accredited living wage employers in Cardiff by 2025, employing 95,000 staff. And I'm heartened that despite these challenging economic times we live in, to say that we are well on target to achieving that. It's meant almost 14,000 seeing an uplift in their pay. It's a practical example of how we are making Cardiff a stronger, fairer city. Over the past year alone, we've welcomed around 30 new accredited living wage employers to our living wage family. These companies employ close to 10,000 people, and around 1,500 of those people received a pay rise during that year. The new intake included Wales' only FTSE listed company, Admiral. Fantastic to have them in the mix. Another great accolade for one of Cardiff's flagship companies, who have also, and I'm sure this is related, been named as one of the best places to work in the UK for its progressive culture, core values, and commitment to diversity and inclusion. So I say to Admiral and all the other employers who've become accredited living wage employers in the last year, it is great to have you on board. There are now in total in Cardiff, and there's always a slight variation in figures between whether you listen to Cardiff University and Cyngor Cymru, but the figures are around 215 accredited living wage employers in the city, employing in excess of 76,000 workers. And I have to say, I take great pride in seeing what proportion of the Wales figure the Cardiff figures make up. And I take from that, yes, the strength of the Cardiff economy, but also the importance of demonstrable leadership in driving this agenda. Now, despite great progress, we all know there are still far too many working people in this city struggling to make ends meet. Inflation might be easing now, but we know that research shows the cost of living crisis is far from over, with around 3.5 million low-paid workers in Britain. Polling of over 2,000 workers earning less than the real living wage found that the levels of financial hardship amongst low-paid workers remains high and well above pre-cost of living crisis figures. And that means real anguish in turn and suffering for hard-working families. I do want to acknowledge as well that even paying the real living wage is no panacea. If you take local government as a whole, since public sector austerity began in 2010, there's been about a 30% cut in real wage incomes within local government. There is industrial action ongoing here in Cardiff, and members of Unite here in the room, I do want to acknowledge that, and taking action on national pay negotiations, which I think shows the continuing challenge that different sectors are facing in the face of the cost of living crisis. I do want to acknowledge that. But what is also clear, mercifully, is the difference that being a real living wage employer can make. So let's do all we can to encourage the organisations that we engage with to continue to pay the living wage and encourage others to do so as well. Let's make sure everyone understands how important it is, dispelling any myths and making clear what a straightforward process, frankly, gaining accreditation is, particularly with the support here in Cardiff and in Wales of Cynnal Cymru. Two last stats to leave you on. We've heard one already, but I'll repeat it, that an additional £75 million has gone into the Cardiff economy since 2012 as a result of council, other organisations, companies paying the real living wage. And an ONS survey in 2022 showed that 18,000 jobs in Cardiff earned below the real living wage. That shows there's more work to do, but that is a downward trajectory from 42,000 jobs that were paid below the real living wage when we established our living wage city partnership. So there is a continuing opportunity and a continuing call for action here. I'm particularly focused now on how we broaden the work done within the city of Cardiff onto the Cardiff capital region, mirroring what is happening in Greater London, adopting a regional approach, building on the good work that we have done here. So that is it from me. Thank you again to Cardiff University, we're some time away from 1st of March, but let's just recall the words of our patron saint, St. David, who said, do the little things, promote the real living wage, and let's make sure we continue to make a big difference here in Cardiff. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Huw. We've got about 15 minutes for questions. When you ask a question, can you please say who you are, and please be concise so we can fit in as many as possible. So who wants to start? To go first.
When you're going to implement the new rate for the living wage in Cardiff Council, and you're going to backdate it?
So is it on? Yeah. Obviously, we had the announcement early this month. Ordinarily, that it comes into force then by April, and that's the timescale by which we've always adopted it in the past. I have certainly asked the question, and we're working through whether we can introduce it earlier. There is clearly work to do around the impact of the real living wage and on spinal points on lower bands. So that's work that needs to be taken through. And there's clearly an affordability question. I think we'd all see that, but I would love to be able to say we can, move to the new level before April, but I can't commit to that at this stage.
Ed, we've got a question online. Sorry, I'm walking around the back here from Ellie. Ellie, yes, Ellie's online. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thanks for sharing your findings. It's really, really interesting. I think the work you're doing is fantastic. I just wondered if you had any insights into the impact of having a Citizens UK chapter or a Living Wage Places Action Group on employers' experiences or accreditation rates in a particular place, or whether this is a potential future area of research.
Thanks very much, Ellie. It's a good question. And the evidence we've got is that both are positively kind of correlated with rates of accreditation. Certainly the place-based kind of campaigns of the living wage, so living wage cities, living wage buildings that we've talked about, do seem to be generating higher levels of accreditation since they've been in operation. Interestingly, as well, if you ask the converse question, that there's an effect. We've done some analysis of organisations that leave the scheme, which actually is they're relatively few in number. The scheme is quite robust, and as we've said, the benefits are strong or are demonstrable for most employers. But rates of, if you like, lapses, employers dropping out, are far lower where there is an active citizens chapter. We find, among other factors.
Can I just add a rider to that? Last week, we launched another report, the real living wage in higher education. We're doing our bit to solve the productivity problem in Wales. And that looked, in that, we present data on the the extent to which universities have signed up to the living wage across the UK. And they're found, accredited universities found everywhere apart from Northern Ireland. I think the first university there is about to accredit. But it's notable that they're concentrated in clusters in London, Wales, Scotland, and Greater Manchester. You know, Andy Burnham, Sadiq Khan, the Welsh and Scottish governments have supported and reinforced local campaign initiatives. And there's a higher, in that particular sector, in higher education, there's a noticeably higher level of accreditation where you have that campaigning encouragement or pressure on employers.
If I can add as well, just a council perspective, we've got a good relationship with, a close relationship with Citizens Cymru in Cardiff. But, you know, it can sometimes be a relationship of challenge where they push us on key issues, and rightly so. But I think what I've also seen is that they bring additional campaign and advocacy capacity to really, you know, poke at, for want of a better phrase, some of the employers in this city who really ought to be accredited or paying the real living wage in a way that has a different kind of legitimacy to if it's Cardiff Council or Cardiff University saying, come on, guys, follow our lead.
Any more? It's a colleague there.
Would you say one of the problems with regard to businesses having employees paid the living wage is some businesses think in terms of their ordinary personnel, and they do not think in terms of their cleaners or their security staff? What comes to mind is, for example, when BT at a shareholders meeting, when asked, are you paying the living wage? They said so. And yet, when I asked them, oh, does that include the security staff and the cleaners? They said, oh, no, but they are subcontracted. But of course, the firm itself chooses who they subcontract to. And so they could always insist when they subcontract that these subcontractors pay the living wage. Is this not quite prevalent in businesses, so that we're thinking that we've achieved the living wage, but in fact, the lower ranks, so to speak, are not actually included in the living wage?
So, I mean, the living wage movement in the UK started with a focus on cleaners in Canary Wharf. That's kind of where the movement was born out of. I think it's important to note that living wage accreditation, as it stands, covers subcontracted workers as well. So, it covers subcontracted workers as well. So to be accredited as a living wage employer, that has to cover not just your direct employees, that has to cover your subcontracted cleaners, catering staff, receptionists. And actually, when you look at the data, those are the groups that are being reported as receiving uplifts, whether they're direct employees or not. Do you want to talk about the numbers?
Well, I think your question raises a good point, and actually, the numbers we have here are the numbers we presented are underestimates of accreditation or of impact, because beyond the firms who sign up and commit to paying their contract staff, there are a large number of employers who pay the living wage but don't formally accredit. And some of the reasons they may choose to do that is for the reasons you allude to, that they don't want to pay all their contract staff. And I think a challenge for the campaign is to try and bridge that gap and to try and, kind of encourage those employers who say, oh, we pay the living wage, to actually pay it to everyone. And one way of doing that is to ensure that they sign up and become formally accredited, because that offers the terms of the license include that all contracted staff must be paid the living wage.
No, well, there's what we would term a shadow living wage. So there are organisations that pay at a living wage rate, but do not accredit, either because they don't want to be tied to that living wage rate going forward, or because they are still working through issues around subcontracting. So they may pay it to direct employees. Every one of those 14,000 accredited employers pays it to both direct employees and subcontracted employees. There are many, many employers beyond that pay it to some
or even all of their staff, but choose not to accredit. I think it's also worth noting from a really practical perspective, with knowing we've got CUNL in the room, but also the Living Wage Foundation online. If employers are thinking about this and the issue is the subcontracted staff, there is a lot of experience in both the Living Wage Foundation and CUNL Cymru to support employers working through issues like that, because that tends to be one of the big blockers, is understanding how you would do that. And there's lots of recognised service providers that do offer options around that. So it is an issue, but there's solutions to it, and many employers have overcome those solutions.
Thanks so much, everyone. We're so proud at Cardiff of all of our living wage. I think we're just drawing the session to a close now. Thank you. So proud of our living wage contribution, and so wonderful that Cardiff Council helps to support SMEs to become accredited. And there's so much support, CUNL Cymru, Living Wage Foundation. If you are online in the room seeking to pursue this agenda, please do get in touch with those organisations. We'll certainly share them with you in our follow-up email to everybody. So thanks so much, everybody. Thanks so much for coming, everyone, and grab a coffee on your way.